I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on the National League of Cities Conference. We're going to do intros, but then after that we're going to be informal. So, start on this side. John? Awesome.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Christopher Constant.
Felix Rivera. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chris and Austin. Tell us the amazing things they learned.
Sure. Yeah, we were just going to kind of run through some things we picked up while we were there. I think speaking for both of us, and we're just going to kind of share this space. We learned a ton. We had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun learning. So I just wanted to share some thoughts. I brought back these handouts that Jennifer printed out and also emailed to you as PDFs. In particular, there's sort of two sets. One was about race and equity and how to be more inclusive in cities, and with sort of the context of redlining and what's happened in cities. And Chris and I probably both have some stuff to say about that. The other is a packet about mental illness, substance abuse, homelessness. This is a three-part deep dive that NLC did about coordinated response to homelessness and what we can do as cities. So I just thought that some of us might want to look at this, and they have examples of what cities have done. And there are resources online. I think they have sort of like a library that I didn't really know to access. But anyway, this is a good start to kind of introduce other folks who aren't going to the conference to NLC. So I just wanted to share a few things, and I'm going to let Chris or jump in whenever you want. But one thing I learned is that I saw a session where the police department spoke and some mental health providers. It was both about mental health services and about homelessness. And then throughout the conference, that was a discussion point. And I think I took away from it that we're doing the right stuff. We're trying. There were sort of key points that were brought up were coordination, like collaborating. So sort of what we're doing with MIT, having police working with social services, all of those things make a difference in actually making progress in solving homelessness. So, of course, the thing maybe missing is some treatment. And Chris, I guess you want to talk about that now or talk about it? I can keep going, I guess,
sure,
and then I'll just let you know. So he's going to talk about a place. Chris went down a day earlier than I did, and he visited a really neat facility, and he's going to talk about that in detail. They talked about the importance of understanding the data that we have and how we share those data, and we've talked about that at the assembly, and I think Meg even brought forward a resolution about data sets, and so that was promising. And let's see, I also want to mention with regard to homelessness and mental health is that at this conference every year, the new president of NLC is selected, and that president picks a few things that they want to focus on, and the top thing that the new president wants to focus on is homelessness. It was just very clear to me that this is, we hear it all the time, it's a nationwide thing, but it is a nationwide thing, and cities all over are grappling with it. John knows because every vacation he goes on, he goes to a homeless shelter or long-term facility. But
hotels, let me tell you.
Yeah. So anyway, to some extent, it made me feel better. It's like, yeah, this is tough, but this is what cities are dealing with, and we're doing our best, and particularly with the resources we have. A few other things to note: Chris and I went to a session on opportunity zones. Few ideas that we might want to talk with the admin about. Jackson, Mississippi sat at our table. They did an event that pitched opportunity zones to investors, so they were actually working with the investors to try to get them engaged. I don't know to what extent we're doing that sort of work, but that I thought was a good idea. Most people felt that opportunity zones are not enough to incentivize development. They're sort of like the cherry on top or the icing on the cake or whatever other metaphor you want to use, but they're...
Sorry, when you use the term opportunity zone,
Yes.
Are you talking like a special...
Federal program, we have several zip codes identified as opportunity zones here in our city.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a federal tax program, a land use tax program that identifies zones. Well, I think the state,
The government.
Was it government part of Government Hill, one of those?
It's not Government Hill, it's Fairview, Mountain View, downtown.
Spenard is
It's part of Spenard. And
Okay.
Shooty went through this with us and submitted it to Governor Walker. Governor Walker officially identified several places in the state, 18 or 20.
Okay.
and what those zones, so help me Chris if I mess up, but developers who have capital gains can put those gains into an opportunity fund. that then can be used to develop in these opportunity zones. The idea being, and you get a tax break for it. So the idea, yeah.
It's
Okay.
not even that. It's literally you get like 10 years no taxes on this money. But it's not just developers. It's anyone of high net worth,
Yep.
extreme high net worth,
True.
who wants to put their money to let it grow
Yep.
in a tax-free way.
And the idea is that you focus development in these areas, which we have, but nationwide, it's hard to make that enough, is what we're finding.
I just break it down, it's not, big groups are doing this where you can, if you have applications, you can put into these
Yes.
funds, but I can sell my warehouse, which I have zero
Yeah.
basis in, I would pay huge taxes on it,
Right.
or
Yeah.
sell it, take that money, build another one in one of these zones, and then basically start from scratch.
Well, it's like that's somewhat separate, like than the 1031 exchange. It's more aggressive, more valuable than that, and so it plays by similar rules the way you could sell and buy in. But most of these funds are for extremely high net worth individuals. It was created under
But
the
you should
Trump.
do it, it would benefit me if I were to do
Mhm.
that.
It would.
I get out of this zero basis, high capital gains.
Yeah. That's-
Finding loopholes, good job, John.
Not a loophole, it's an incentive to do something in Fairview.
Right, that's true.
Airport.
Yeah, good point.
And it's
You're
not
just
all
following
of
the
Fairview.
program.
It's really just the strip where the highways are. It's kind of depressing.
But a great warehouse and nothing to sell.
Yeah.
And there are kind of two things going on with the opportunity zones. I say to most cities we talked with that are like our size, Jackson's smaller, but sort of not, bustling economies. Those are saying it's not enough. Then you have the other side, just like San Antonio, it's 1.6 million, they're doing pretty well, housing's going through the roof. Developers are building in opportunity zones, but then you're seeing really quick gentrification and changing neighborhoods. So there's sort of two different sides of what cities are worried about. This isn't helping us at all, or this is totally changing our communities in a really fast fashion. So that's sort of a divide at
I would
LC.
offer, though, what I heard most from almost everybody is they still haven't figured out how to tap into the program in any meaningful way. And so, I have not yet found really great examples of funded programs through the opportunity zones that are successful on the ground. A lot of them are still pretty drawings, waiting for someone to bite, like fishing. And so the consensus I heard is pretty clearly it's not enough. And in San Antonio, as the example Austin just made, is that their problem isn't benefiting or hurting from the opportunity zones. It's like just noise on the way to this massive wave of construction that's happening because there's so much pressure to grow from all directions. People are flooding there, moving there. Their affordable housing crisis is relative to, they did state we have 100% policy focusing on no displacement, but I got an article today emailed to me that was San Antonio and pictures of people being thrown out of their homes with their mattresses stacked on the side of the road because the developments are happening and they are being gentrified out.
And they have, I think Dallas, San Antonio, and maybe one other city are they're in the top 5 of fastest growing cities. Like Texas is just taking off, which I had no idea. So some things, just developments that folks are doing, daylighting is super popular. So the idea of daylight is Fish Creek or other streams, that's a thing. Of course, you have the San Antonio Riverwalk, which it's famous for, and Chris and I did some evening walks together, and we're just sort of thinking, wow, this would be really cool. You have this place that people want to walk. It takes you all through the city,
and they're actually digging and excavating new areas of the river to expand because everywhere they put it, it explodes in growth.
Yeah, it's really cool.
22 kilometers.
Chris went for a run. I went for a 7-mile walk one day or something. So one night.
Did you guys go see the animal while you were there?
Yeah, it was right by our hotel.
I didn't.
I was literally right outside.
I know, but I didn't.
I didn't go in. I went through the campus.
Yeah.
It's too many. There's
This would be a
screaming children all around.
better time of year to do it than when I did it in late August.
Yeah.
It was 104 degrees.
Yeah, it was in the 60s when we were there. It's pretty nice. I went to a conference there once in June, and it was 111. And I biked all along the Riverwalk. So they have these bikes where you just, click the thing and take the bike and return it somewhere else. And so a lot of these cool programs that you see, it just kind of makes people bustle around the city. And,
I'm super anti those scooters. People treat them like trash. They're just laying everywhere. It's really
They had some areas, some projects where they talked about buying, if you're a city and you're downtown where the core you want to grow and there's vacant land, if you can scrape together the money, buy it, even if you don't know what you're going to do with it, because over time, you know, they had a couple cities with examples of where over time they found a vision to plug into the city, and maybe another parcel came available 10 years later, and then they gathered it and we did this really cool thing. So I just thought that was something for us to think about. They talked about the importance of incentives, development incentives, which we know and we're working on and have with Chris. Something that Chris Constant, not Shooty, and I have been talking about a lot, and I know it was in the Ben and Adams report, and others have talked about it too, but is getting sort of like a project or case manager in the development services department that can actually help people go through the process of whether you're a small business or you want to build a housing complex or whatever you want to do, you need help. And I've actually, since I've been on the body, have had my aide do one big project, which was to interview about 20 small businesses and talk with them about the process and what we could do better. And basically it was like better website, online services, and a case manager who understands how. Barbara, you want to say something?
Yes, I going to get my snarky comment. An ombudsman. I'm joking.
Well, yeah,
it's
so
that kind
slightly
of
different though. It's a navigator, like
Yeah.
a case manager and
Right.
navigator. Some communities are successfully doing this, where when you have projects of scale, that applicant at immediately at the time of application gets a champion, and that champion bowls over the bureaucracy if it gets in the way, figures out how to solve the problems. So it is kind of like a project ombudsman, but it's out at the planning department, and their job literally is to expedite the function of people getting their jobs in and done.
Well, and they can liaise because
Yeah.
they know the people there. You know, I mean, what Judy heard a lot, she created a report for me, is, you know, it's like someone would need to get this certification signed off, and so they would do it, and they put all their money into it, and then a different inspector comes and, oh no, we don't actually think that satisfies it, and oh, actually for traffic or whatever you have to do this. So it's like you're just getting bounced around and you don't maybe have the full vision. And so anyway, we even started on our walk exploring how do we do that, how does it relate to the updated building fees, is there a way to pull some money from those fees, and anyway, so
Yep.
we need to talk to Shooty, I guess. And,
It certainly is a strong way to go forward. And they've talked about it, what is that, 815 fund, or what's that fund?
Oh, the one, yeah,
811 fund?
the one that it's
The builders talked about it.
181. I think.
SAP.
181, that's right. The
Yeah.
181 fund.
Some 12-digit number.
Oh, yeah, it's
and so,
changed.
but with that in mind, that fund could be the vehicle to make this happen. As we made a policy that's going to start to refill that, that could be the vehicle by which we start to identify how a person could be from that.
Yeah,
And it could be a number of
the builders would approve of it.
Oh,
They
no,
would
they've
really
been
love it.
asking for it
Yeah.
for years. So we just want to find a way to make it happen. Even if we started with 2 people, I mean, it's like, it could really change, I think, how development is done here. And, yeah.
We could be working parallel process.
Mhm. And just other thing that I want to mention, we did 2 things, was art in public spaces. That was a big topic, sort of interspersed in sessions we went to, but also one of the main sessions was about art. And I liked, there was a quote somewhat similar to, like, you could spend all your money filling potholes, but like, where would the magic be in your city? And it's true, you know, it's like we're always like, oh, we can't do this extra thing because we have to pay for this core service, but sometimes the extra thing is what makes it feel special. So how do you figure that out? And I know we all do a good job of taking that seriously and trying. But the example that I thought was cool was that Seattle one, where they took this like repellent, water resistant, whatever, I don't know what it is, and
Spray.
painted like crosswalks and like, or not what's that game called? Where you jump
Hopscotch.
around? Hopscotch. And like other things, messages about the rain or whatever on the Seattle sidewalks. And so when it rains, it would get wet all around it and almost like a stencil, leave these like really positive, beautiful messages. And it was like the cost was nothing.
Yeah.
It was just spraying this stuff on the ground.
Stencils.
But it was art and people loved it. And then they would be excited when it rained because there's all these magical messages popping up. So anyway.
In fact, there were some very complex and gorgeous pieces of art
Yeah,
that were done in
it's
this style
beautiful.
beyond the simple stencils that were kind of this young guy who said, I'm just going to do this. And so it was really interesting.
Really cool. And cheap. You know, it kind of reminds you that
And that's
we do that kind of stuff.
the museum, and the idea that we can expend some of the percent for our monies on non-permanent art is
Right.
a high value, because that's where those ideas come from. All right, so I have a list.
Okay, one
You
more
go
thing,
ahead.
and then you'll. So one thing that we both spent some time with, and I think really got a lot out of, was the the racial equity piece, and one of the handouts is about that, and particularly sort of the history of redlining. I had heard a lot about redlining. I definitely learned some new things. In the 1930s, the federal government gave out loans, they would give out subsidized mortgages or low rate, but only if you, in a lot of areas, they identified the zip codes or the areas where it would happen, and those were the white areas. So there were, these neighborhoods of color that couldn't get financing, and the neighborhoods started to deteriorate. No one was buying homes, and that, of course, that whatever equity we build as white people in our neighborhoods that were sponsored by the federal government, we then give on to our families. So there's sort of this like generational idea of what we did back in the 30s and how it's impacting neighborhoods today.
All the way through the 60s.
Yeah, right. It lasted for a long time. There was also, I went to this session about, there was a fellow there from, I think, the Brookings Institute or somewhere, talking, his expertise is redlining and housing and equity issues. And they did some studies on the same house, same style of neighborhood, everything, controlled for a lot of features about the house and neighborhood. And the home like that, Black communities was undervalued by 26% of the same exact thing and same neighborhood features as a white community. And they talked a lot about, there were a lot of Black folks in the audience who got up and spoke and said, we need, what's the percentage? 90% of appraisers are white. And so they talked a lot about appraisals and how that really sets value in community. But if you have internal bias about what you think a home is worth based on the neighborhood, and there's some problems there. So I like not thought about that aspect of it at all. And they talked a lot about, so the panel was great. There's this guy from Brookings, and they had all these city leaders, and the city leaders talked about establishing some advisory groups that would help evaluate racial equity in all kinds of ways. And one thing I thought was kind of cool is they in Dallas, they evaluate their budget based on an equity lens. So they set up a whole program to look at how they're funding everything and whether they're taking into account, historical inequities. Yeah.
I don't know it really in depth, but road projects, AMATs, federal funding requires social justice elements. So there's increased focus on social justice. We're working on a new rating system for our projects, and it has a social justice section. But if you're looking for more info, that's fairly, I think somewhat about it, because it's been a decade where they've been working on that.
Maybe I just need John to give me like a 2-hour AMATs.
Social justice component that's required by
Because of the
FAA.
Fed.
I haven't looked to see what it is, but we had to have it for an audit. So we got it.
Definitely, it's integrated in the federal spend.
Yeah. Cool.
Now, so I would add to that, just read last night, the Great Schools Rating website that is pretty commonly featured. It's used on Zillow, expresses the schools in this neighborhood. It actually has been proven to further exacerbate racial segregation in a way that is unbelievable and deeply embedded, and everything they've tried to fix it doesn't fix it. And so the white schools are high-rated schools, Black schools are average or less-rated schools, and there's no way that they found to get that system fixed so that we don't literally use our algorithms to further embed this, and so we continue under the new god of economics to exacerbate this whole problem. And so it's a national interest topic, and we experience it here.
So, one comment that I would say is that I'm really excited to hear that folks want to work on this issue. Locally, the First Alaskans Institute, they have taken the lead in Alaska in working on this issue, and they work with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and that foundation has a program called Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. And that I don't know if Kellogg was at NLC. Hopefully we were.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. It's so big. It's hard to.
Yeah, and so they, I have worked with them in the past, and then just coming chair, I have to drop some things off. But they really want to work with the city on these things, and frankly, I think we are probably better opportune than, let's say, the state government to work on those things and do things and move forward with it.
Yeah.
So I would be happy, and I'm sure also would to join in. My neighborhood's experienced this today. The plats still read these properties may only be sold to Americans of the white race, sold or alienated. I mean, the plats are still crystal clear where, and in fact, there's a great story of.
And that's in Rogers Park too.
Yeah.
Bill Falsey, actually, he used to live in Rogers Park. He lives in
Yep.
San Mike now, but in his chain of title, there's a deed that says that.
Well, and there was a property in Rogers Park that the first African American family moved out of the red line, and as they were building their house that was burnt down, they were chased out. And then there's Green Acres over in College Village area, which was the first neighborhood where they broke the red line, and it was because a woman who was a woman of some interesting repute, who worked really hard with the businessmen of the downtown, knew all the secrets and made a lot of money. She bought out of the red line, and they couldn't stop her because she knew too many of their interests. And so this town has a very interesting and real history. And in fact,
The line still does exist a little bit. In
yeah,
the
no, it's
neighborhood.
squishy and it's
Yeah.
economically driven. But there's a historian we should bring in for a work session at some time. David Reamer is his name. He can tell this whole story. It's quite amazing. Names and dates and times and places. Who's who.
One last thing, and Barbara, hopefully you're okay with me putting you on the spot here, but Barbara has been reading what is the report? Do you remember the name of the report?
Racial tension.
Bingo. And it was a pretty lengthy report.
Yeah.
But have you finished it yet?
I have not finished it.
Okay.
But it's a good read for us.
Yeah.
And maybe I can do some highlights for you and bring them back to just email them.
And it's about
Yep.
this kind of issue. And
You know,
what's
there's
it about?
a thought.
It's a report that NLC did on
Yeah.
race and equity, and I think it was city-based, right?
Great.
Yeah.
So why don't we, at one of our, I'm not sure what they're being called, in our rules committee meetings, adopt or propose the adoption of a plank of effort around this topic, and then we can build it up, kind of similar to what we've done, not as detailed as our 4 areas that have been branched out as a strategic plan, but as a project that we can discuss and put in context. 'Cause that's great.
Through the chair, I think one of the important things, it's sort of like your communications plan. It has to permeate all of your goals or
Great.
colors.
But we need to have a conversation that really
Yeah.
thoroughly dives into what does that mean and where does it fit, how does it play, where do we go, get context, and then build a platform.
We can talk about that next week if we have time.
Yeah, we'll make time.
I think that's about it, actually. Oh, I was just going to say, there's a book called The Color of Law, which the fellow recommended, which apparently talks about the history, how history informs today, and how the law has perpetuated inequity. The cool thing I thought about this is it's not, it's easy to think, oh, back then we did these
Right.
crazy things. But it's that those things that inform where people lived, and then their neighborhoods crumbled. And then the government said, well, now that your neighborhood's crumbled, we're going to abandon you. And then there's more crime. And then so it sort of like just folds on itself. And then people have no equity. Oh, and then you want to move to another neighborhood. You can't sell your house because it's a crime-ridden area. And also you're not allowed to live anywhere else because of these covenants. And so then people are stuck with no equity. And then what do you pass on to your kids? Well, meanwhile, the other kids who are living in a nice neighborhood are gaining that. And so it's just...
Then their taxes go up, and so then you actually have an artificial barrier, or a very real barrier, depending on how you look at it, where they can't even actually buy in because they don't have
Yep.
the historic equity. And
Yeah.
it is, my neighborhoods are rich with this story. It's amazing.
Yeah. So anyway, it was really fascinating, sad, but also made me think, oh, there's probably some room in Anchorage to try to address some of this.
Great.
So when they were talking, did you talk a little about the opioid epidemic at all?
So what interestingly, so they had this amazing panel that was like across the whole room, and you went through and they talked about the history of redlining. And what they pointed out, which I've heard people say before, is right when crack was a problem, but it was predominantly black folks using it, it was a criminal problem. So we need to get on the streets, we need to enforce these crimes, these people are doing drugs,
3
they're bad
strikes, you're
people,
out.
3 strikes, you're out. The opioid situation is an epidemic because it's a bunch of white people who are using it. And so, right, that's a health problem. That's something we need to fund, and you bet there's been a ton of money funded into that. And so even those kinds of things are like, those are with a race lens. Like, why do we care about opioids but not about crack?
There might be a different view on that too, though, because it's we learn from the
Yeah.
did that kind of thing, said that flat out didn't work.
Mhm.
Let's try something different
Yeah.
this round. So I don't, maybe it was racist. I didn't perceive it that way. I perceived it as so good we're learning.
You know, and I would offer that I often say this about the policies we live today that come from policies of the past. And I harp on this enough. You know, Thurman Carlock is a creation of this will. It was people doing the best they had with what they knew at the time, right?
Yeah.
I don't think anyone was overtly, or very few were overtly willing to do bad things to poor or black or Native people. It's just, that's how it was. And now we continue to live in a society where that's just how it is in a number of ways. And so what's the answer today? And then what problems can we create for them tomorrow? Because inevitably, in trying to solve things, we're going to do the same thing, which is with the best of the knowledge and information we have, we're going to do the best we can. And they're going to find one day that was not the best thing we could be doing, but we didn't have the consciousness for it.
And so did they talk about the lawsuits against the pharmaceutical companies?
I didn't hear anyone mention that.
I didn't hear that.
Because I think we don't even have to sign on, you're automatically in the lawsuit unless you opt out, is that correct?
All right, I'm going to take this topic and move it now. So, I did visit Haven for Homelessness, or Haven for Hope, they call it, Haven for Homelessness. And it was a 1,700-bed congregated facility for homeless people in San Antonio. And instead of kind of narrating it this way, I'm going to read a selection of text that I was texting to Nancy as I was there, because it was quite impressive. And so I'm here. It's a huge campus in San Antonio. Their operations director is packing a sidearm 45. It's a huge place. It costs $101 million of capital to build and $20 million to operate. They serve several thousand people a year. Their mission is that it's clean and safe. It's outside of downtown, but not so far. It's 2 miles. They serve kids, adults. They have low barrier, high barrier. They serve sex offenders. Everyone is helped. It's kind of insane. I did note that the Rasmussens paid $100 million to build a wing at the museum. Just think about context.
Well, did he tell you who funded that?
Yes, oil.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just
So
saying, there's a context here. We have one family who funded $100 million.
This is your home base.
Yeah.
You might have some
No, I
San
totally get it.
Antonio.
So the only population they don't serve are teens. They're helped in another place. It's a 22-acre campus. They have, interestingly, funded by a religious guy, a very black and white policy. We will serve trans, LGBT, anybody. We will serve them here. In San Antonio, they do not have a place where they allow outdoor camping. It's just not a thing. You will be inside of this facility or you will get a place. There are like 5 or 10 people I saw downtown camping out, but for the majority, it was indoors. They have transitional services. They have a low barrier and a transformational campus. They've had someone stay on their campus for 10 years, no limits. And that person finally got housed. They finally figured out what was wrong with her, and it was a chronic progressive mental decay, some Parkinson's-like disease that didn't have external symptoms that was causing her. And they figured it out, and they got her into a place, and she's now stable. On that campus, 1,700 people, they have 300 children being served. Now, in their courtyard, which is the low barrier facility, it's almost like a jail, steel structure. It's ventilated, just open because it's Texas, and it was a high weather event, and it was like 68 degrees or 70 degrees, and there was a
People were wearing
breeze.
puffy jackets.
It was
It
like,
was hilarious.
they were literally, the
People
weather
were talking about how cold it was. We were cracking up.
literally, they had their emergency service prepared because of the weather. It's like, oh my God.
Sounds like my aunt in Phoenix with a sweater on when it was in the 70s.
Right.
Exactly. So, interestingly, in this outdoor metal structure, there's nothing but people that could burn there. They had sprinklers. The fire marshal wins every time. And let's see, they have 250 people who work there, 150 partner staff who show up every day, 45 partner offices. They call themselves faith adjacent, not faith based. So they allow anyone to come in and practice whatever faith they have, although they were founded by a religious person. It's a labyrinth. They have community partners who pay in these kind of cubicles that are set up in this huge barn of a room. Really, well, nicely made, but it's a barn. All these cubicles set up that the partner entities pay $200 a month to provide services there. When a person walks in, they meet 4 people. They meet a housing case manager, an employment case manager, they meet a clinician like mental health and addictions, and they meet a peer. So they're immediately wrapped around by people who understand the nature of the problem. On-site childcare, the people who work there can use it, the people who are homeless there can use it, and the community brings their kids there to actually receive services, and they pay, childcare. It's kind of shocking. Half that low barrier part felt institutional, but the other side didn't. They vet their partners. Their partners must be upbeat, positive, hopeful, and their services must be delivered with dignity and respect. We don't do hellfire and brimstone. They have an endowment of $17 million. Was paid for by an oil man who runs every year a golf tournament. One day raises $5 million.
Wow.
There's a train that runs literally right through the campus. It's an industrial neighborhood. They've rebuilt completely into what looks like a college campus with dorms and everything. On their wish list is to have more permanent supportive housing units and a campus urgent care clinic that runs 24 hours. They have pet care. They keep dogs. They keep cats. They let people who are homeless come in there. They work hard to break down the silos. They have like 30 to 40 reportable crimes a week. With 1,700 people, that's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
But then Nancy's comment was, it sounds like Disneyland. And so then as soon as I got off the bus back downtown, there was this rather nice, genial police officer. So I stopped him and I said, so what's the real story? And he's like, oh my God, no, it's not as good as it sounds. All around that neighborhood, we've driven all its trouble. So what you didn't see is go to this neighborhood and you'll see all the crime and trouble on the streets. But still, it provides a good service. He said the one bad thing is like the white power gangs go there and recruit because all the vulnerable people are there, and so they're able to like tap into that. So I wouldn't recommend that we contemplate a massive 1,700 person facility because the writing's on the wall where that would be. But they do some things that are quite amazing. And so if you're ever in San Antonio, they'll give you a tour of Haven for Hope. It's worth contemplating.
So you're recommending the Sullivan Arena.
So,
Ship Creek.
So
I've
just a
actually kinda not
couple
been
comments
fully
on that.
using it, so-
I think it's important to note that the oil baron who helped get this started, he was retiring and considering his legacy.
Yep.
And so I think as we think of these very high wealth individuals in our community, which there are some who are getting elder, this is something that we should really think about. What is going to be their legacy? And then second is, a lot of the lessons learned here, I think we are truly implementing in that when we're thinking about this new midtown shelter, part of what we're thinking about is how can we co-locate and house some of the partners that work so that they're in here and they can have literally offices in there of their staff so that they're there working with them all the time. So there's a lot of good lessons there. Definitely we're not going to go and build that big facility, but there's a lot of really good stuff.
But interestingly, I did not see, except for the scale in the medical clinic, which we're even trying to do, I didn't see anything we're not on the track of.
Yeah.
And so we're well down the trail.
Well, you might, but I think what I saw in Omaha was this, campuses, two separate, one low barrier,
Right.
one higher. But they had all the services there, much smaller scale. These were 600, maybe something like that.
Still
roughly.
pretty big.
They were about fairly big, maybe even smaller than that. But I think having everything so close, because
Yeah.
you don't go half a mile or a mile down there,
Right.
go there. It's like, let me walk you to that door.
Yep.
Same here. It was all here. But interestingly, like your observation in Omaha, there was no deterioration outside. There was no sense of despair. One interesting thing, they bus the kids, 300 kids, so they go to the school district.
Yeah.
They have made a deal with the school district that that's the first and last stop of the bus. So the kids who are getting picked up at the homeless shelter are picked up first on the bus.
Yeah.
And they're dropped off last. So nobody knows where they came from
Oh,
or
that's
that they're
so cool.
stigmatized into this kind of negative perspective. I mean, there are some great
I
things.
hadn't heard that yet. That is very
You're still
cool.
on the bus, I know where you
I know where you're going. Yeah, they'll figure it out. So, okay, next topic. I applied for the NLC, National Federal Advocacy Committee for Transportation Infrastructure, in particular to serve on the board subcommittee, and I'm waiting to hear back on that application. And with that, I'll be carrying forward as much as I possibly can the effort to create a federal advocacy lobbying arm to get our port funded to rebuild it, which means, like our resolution with AML, a little more broadly looking than just our port. But my 3 planks that I'm working on are, in terms of port infrastructure, it's national defense, economic security, and climate resiliency. This is going to be my message for the next year. You'll be tired of hearing it just like you are at 3rd and Carlick. So, economic development, their message was very simple. Downtown, 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 downtown. Everything they're doing is in their downtown. And that felt like home a little bit, and it's interesting. And so, for what it's worth, there you can tell there are towers and cranes, and it is expanding in the downtown, and they're digging their river walk in a way that is pretty surprising. They're adding whole links that never would have been it, but they have all this water flowing through. And everywhere they put the water, they make money. And so it raises the question, what can we do in our downtown to inspire people? And that comes back to this conversation we've been having about what happens at the Old Native Hospital site with the putting in of a First Alaskans, especially a Dena'ina monument there. And we could do kind of a connection from our downtown to the Cook Monument, which is at the end of 4th Avenue. And so I'm thinking along those lines, how do we create a united, fused downtown experience that people who are coming and visiting could walk through, so it's not just the towers and the flowers. So
What if they run out of water?
that's a good question. That's a good
I know.
question. Yeah.
Because I mean, it's a pretty dry and hot area.
I think
It's
Hickle had a
happened.
plan. I think Hickle had a plan. We should either create a pipeline or ship it down.
That was California.
Yeah, but still, I mean, it's Hickle's plan. We can work on it. So then the next topic is I got to ride on Navia, the autonomous vehicle that they had tested there. And it was pretty interesting and great. But what's germane to this is I spoke with this gentleman, and I'll be sharing this with Shudi, I think would be the proper person. We had a discussion about creating an ordinance that would restrict the implementation of driverless autonomous vehicles until such a time as they are tested in extreme northern climates. And so I asked him if that would be a problem, and he said, no, absolutely not. In fact, most of our implementations of these autonomous vehicles are still having someone that can hit the stop button if they need to. And so he said, we're testing them in Scandinavia somewhere and in Michigan. And I said, so do you have a place that is testing what happens when you have snow, and then rain, and then ice, and then dark, and then light all at once within 2 hours or 3 hours of each other? And he's like, yeah, we're not testing that. And so the theory would be tested here first. And so the idea I'm pretty much in support of after talking with this guy who's the solution engineer for an actual autonomous vehicle. He said he would consult with us, would be we should contemplate that restriction.
And that's actually smart because, I mean, we already know we're the leading front of climate change. So what's happening here is going to happen in other places. So,
and we don't frame it as a restriction. We frame it as we are setting a policy that we would like you to come here. And what that then does is we want you to be tested here before we let you free. Okay, so I was speaking with Susie. I am not proposing we go with a vendor, as this is at the trade show, but there was a vendor who showed me their e-notify system and their public record system, and there are actual applications out there that we can figure out how to implement into our web system so we don't have to create them. And so I've asked Susie in this conversation she and I have been having about how do we implement this better system for the public to follow everything we're doing, to look up apps that are in existence. And so she's now started an effort to do kind of a tech review out there, who's doing what. I'm not sure why we haven't thought about that before, but now we have one to start with. We've already talked about opportunity zones. I won't go back there other than to say I have a little graphic of one that was a pitch. But again, it's just a pitch, it never went anywhere. And that was almost everyone. They just have a pitch. And some great pitches are being developed. So if nothing else, if Trump's program doesn't provide $1, what it's done is people have innovated in their thinking. What would we like to see here if we had people of high net worth willing to spend their money here, which will lead to the future of that happening. So then I met with the manufacturers of Urban Blue, which are self-cleaning public toilets. And they list them in French and English because they're a Canadian company. But they're made for northern climates. They are rather not expensive. I mean, $150,000 to $200,000 all in. Compared to the $500,000 ones that we've been looking at in Portland, that's half as much, third as much. And so basically they do have a tech component. They're serviceable by an app. They're anti-graffiti. They have stainless steel mirror. They're fireproof. Sheet-fed paper, so you can't just take all the paper. Self-cleaning floors. They disinfect the toilet, the whole toilet after each use. They have a framework for anti-vandalism. It's a pretty interesting concept. But so I brought this, and I'll be sharing it with upstairs. The bottom line is we don't have to have a city where people have to go to the bathroom in the woods. We could come up with a better system. It has been figured out in other places.
Share it with Josh Duran.
What?
Yeah, and if you could share that with me, I'm actually, one of my constituents is trying to facilitate a meeting between me and the plumbers and steam fitters, and they're really interested in this thing.
Yes, we need to do it. And so I brought a model. And then I am working now with Julie at the museum. We had a really nice reception one night with the AIA, the Architects Association. If you don't recall, we did that work session with that group that were here doing a resiliency project for Anchorage with the mayor. And so they were part of the host of that. And so we had a lovely dinner, found some real food in downtown San Antonio, which was kind of shocking because mostly it's like tourist food. And while we were there, I had a thought, and now I'm working with Julie at the museum on this, is to use AIA and the design forum and the museum as a convener to have a fun, creative conversation about what would happen if we designated the Fairview core between 9th and 15th, between Gamble and Ingra, or some distance in that area, as a climate resiliency, climate relocation design project area, where we would get some of the best and brightest minds together to contemplate what would a relocation neighborhood for people coming in from rural Alaska or from outside look like, need, feel like. What would we do if we were to dream this up? And so she's picked this up and she's running off with it because it's certainly well within their wheelhouse of creative, innovative ideas. And the Fairview Neighborhood Plan contemplated that our neighborhood there could be a perfect 7-story or 6-story high-density neighborhood that the downtown could support, the neighborhood could use because it would revitalize, bring people in, and serve as a place for, I hope this isn't disparaging, but climate change refugees, people who are forced off the land because
That's the term they use.
everything is broken or breaking in their homeland. So that's one thing. And then one of the most interesting talks, go figure, was the marijuana policy talk that they had. It was called Lessons Learned, and it was a police officer, chief detective from Denver. It was the policy staff person who runs all the marijuana for the city of LA, and then it was someone else from the Midwest who just legalized medical. He wasn't so interesting. But
hopefully he's not listening to this.
Yeah, he wasn't. But the LA woman was amazing, and the Denver guy was really something. He says his peers laughingly call him Commander Cannabis because it's his job to regulate weed. And his biggest takeaway for everybody, and they've seen it more than anyone has, is that through all of the fear and all the scary stories and all of everybody's kind of very rigid allowance of this thing to be implemented, nothing's changed. From his law enforcement perspective, they still have criminals on the street. They don't have more criminals on the street. They still have problems. They had problems before, and they're going to have problems forever. That this did solve some problems because it took at least one product out of the black market. And so this is from their chief police officer who's in charge of regulating all this. He did say that they have a problem, one new problem, but they had it with the black market anyways, that there is some diversion happening there because the markets are structured somewhat differently. And that diversion means that people are having big piles of cash that aren't trackable and regulatable through the system. So he too called for national banking rules to allow for us to get this off the streets and out of the cash markets and into the hands of the banks and regulate it all the way. And as soon as I receive the PowerPoint presentation from him and from the LA person, I'll share it with everybody because it's a very, very interesting conversation. The woman from LA, she was an African-American woman who was young, very young to be in charge of such a massive industry, but they have an interesting problem in LA. They have unregulated, open retail establishments happening in their town, right? It's a big, big city, right? They can't police it all. And so they have pot shops that are not licensed.
I've heard that's happened in San Francisco too.
And they have licensed pot shops. And so, and what they found, and this is a very interesting thing for us to contemplate, for their enforcement tactics, they're not policing and busting and creating criminals out of these low-level street salespeople because they realize it's not the best way. What they're doing is using code enforcement, using utilities, and hammering them with fees and fines, the owners of the property, because who's really making the money if they're renting these properties? You know, because they don't own them. You don't have title to these lands if you're doing these illegal businesses. Somebody's making bank off of that. And so their efforts have been focusing on the people who are profiting through the land deals, through code enforcement and other tactics. And that has been very swift in resolving any of these problems that come up, because you go after the money, they're like, oh, wait a minute, I have a stake here, I'm not gonna let this happen. They fix the problem. And so that was a pretty insightful thing.
Back to the cannabis commando, did he go over the Portugal model at all?
He didn't. He was very much like, this isn't a deal, and we're glad not to have to enforce on these things. But he also made a joke about how his is the first town in America that's decriminalized mushrooms, psilocybin. And so he's like, my town is going.
Which town is that?
Denver.
Oh, Denver.
Yeah, the voters decriminalize mushrooms,
Wow.
and this is now a new trend. Give us 10 years. I'm talking
Well,
to
Johns
some folks.
Hopkins.
Yeah, it's
People
happening.
are
Psychiatric
happier
care.
if they have done mushrooms.
Who's this?
Johns Hopkins did a big study on mushrooms and the impact on people. It showed that people were happier and more connected spiritually if they had done them.
Well, I know there was experiments done with small doses of LSD to increase productivity.
Or to eliminate depression, especially chronic depression
Yeah.
related to people who are dying. Acceptance of
Microdosing
death.
is used for
Yeah.
eliminating depression.
But I've told anyone who's brought that to me as a potential policy consideration, take it to the voters, please, because I'm not getting in front of that one. And so take it to the voters. With that said, this was a surprisingly valuable trip to NLC.
Good.
And the most important thing for me will be that port infrastructure committee once it happens. I made a kind of a backroom deal, if you will, with the new president of NLC that we're going to work together because he is San Pedro Harbor. And Bill is going on a trip to New Jersey, to a port that has a $50 billion problem compared to our $1 billion problem, or two, depending who you ask. And so we're going to pull folks. Billion. No, they have a $50 billion problem in
New Jersey?
New Jersey, and Bill's going there to consult with them on their project. They've invited him there. And so I'm going to identify 5 or 6 ports that I work with to develop this lobbying campaign to go forward to DC and really try to leverage a resiliency, national defense, economic security campaign to promote A, our port, and B, national security after this change. As the water rises, we need ports that are going to stand. So,
Yeah, I think it's the proven method.
Well, they already have flooding in Miami during high tides.
yep. New Venice.
I feel like it's easy sometimes to be like, oh, why do we want to go all the way to San Antonio? You know, it's like we're got our own city, but each time we've done this, I mean, the first time was really productive because we did the lobbying stuff and sort of started talking with Dan Sullivan and others, not only about FEMA, but also about the port, which sort of folded into this next step. But it's really cool to just learn what other cities are doing. You pick up all those ideas.
So one of the things that I've done is since I've learned that we also have a membership in another national organization, NACO.
Yeah.
I have earlier this week I called and talked to our regional representative with NACO, and just got a sort of a 101. What do they do? How do they focus on things? It's very different from NLC, and so I'll present on that at the Rules Committee meeting, and then we'll talk about if we want to have NACO representatives.
So you should bring Nils in.
I think
Anna
Dick
also works.
They
Dick
do.
or Elby used
Yeah.
to be in that, didn't they, Barbara?
NLC.
NLC.
Elvia was actually there.
It was Harriet Drummond that used to be with NACO.
Oh, okay.
But I think she only ever went to like one meeting and then never went again.
Elvia was in San Antonio, but it was so big and she was so busy we didn't even talk to her.
I saw her a couple times. Man, we sat together.
I
Like,
spotted her.
I didn't sit in a number of sessions because I sat on behalf of ML in the resolutions committee and worked out the last of the resolution changes because they do like 60 resolutions that are the policy for the next year for NLC. And so Nils asked me to do that, and then I voted for Anchorage in the election at the end, which was another 2 hours. But it was a unanimous election, so it wasn't all that fun. But Elvie and I sat together and cast the votes.
And the other thing I might mention too is like, yeah, we signed up to be the reps. I mean, that could always change, whatever. But you know, to the extent we each have money in our individual accounts, you know, if you don't fully pay your aid or whatever, there could be more of us who go to that.
In fact,
So
they
it's
did
just
say they want the chair.
an idea. Like, I
Just
think it would be
FYI.
kind of fun to get a whole crew. You know that. So.
There are many cities have a lot of people.
Oh yeah, and most cities have the mayors there, city managers. So I talked to Bill about it. I'm like, yeah, you guys don't go to these things. It's probably a funding thing, but there's definitely. I mean, we just talk about all the stuff we talk about all the time anyway.
And
so.
see how other people are doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing at NACO. He told me that usually it's a big contingent. It's not just like
It's
one or
kind of
two
like
people.
AML we don't go to too. It's
Yeah.
like, wow, what are we doing?
We're learning. We're learning.
We're learning.
When I was there,
Great.
it was announced
Thanks, everyone.